White House Chief Medical Advisor Anthony Fauci denying he was being muzzled by then-President Trump early in the pandemic. In thousands of newly released emails obtained by BuzzFeed from the first part of last year, and among those revelations includes an exchange between Fauci and a nonprofit that sent millions in U.S. grant money to the Wuhan lab. In one email, the president of Eco Alliance thanking Fauci in April 2020 for backing the natural origin theory of the virus, writing, quote, "I just wanted to say a personal thank you on behalf of our staff and collaborators for publicly standing up and stating that the scientific evidence supports a natural origin for COVID-19 from a bat to human spillover, not a lab release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. From my perspective, your comments are brave, and coming from your trusted voice will help dispel the myths being spun around the virus's origins." Fauci responded the next day, "Many thanks for your kind note." And now critics are accusing Fauci of profiting off the pandemic with a new book deal, following in the footsteps of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who also released a, quote, leadership lessons book during the pandemic. John James, I start with you on this. What are your top line thoughts?
The first thing that I'm thinking about is if President Biden is now going back and saying that we need an investigation to test what Facebook and Twitter and these online platforms dismissed as conspiracy theories just a few months ago, then we also need to investigate how we might have been played by the real threat that we face in this country, communist spheres of influence, Russia, China, who seek to subjugate us, to defeat us, to end America, and will support terrorist regimes and rogue regimes all over the world to do it. China is not acting as our friend. Russia is not acting as our friend. And I believe that if we do an investigation, we may find that the most trusted voices that we listened to for the past year may have been compromised or at least manipulated.
Kennedy, Dr. Fauci's PR team is like literally must be as large as someone like Lady Gaga or something, because the releases that they have said that his book is about, I mean, the range is crazy. It's in one, how to lead in a time of crisis. In another, it's how to lead after a time of crisis. In another, it's life lessons and inspiration. In another, it's learn my philosophy of life. I mean, this guy thinks he's Deepak Chopra. And the reality is that there's a strong argument here. Is he profiting off what is still happening, which is American suffering, and certainly right now to a tremendous economic degree, while there are still many questions about his conflict of interest and his competence in the role?
Yes, there are still variants. There is still a health threat. There are still businesses that are shut down. There are still kids who are out of school. There are so many problems that have followed from the virus itself that require his work, because he is handsomely paid. He's the highest paid federal employee. And, therefore, if he wants to go on the lecture circuit, if he wants to write books, if he wants to have leadership seminars, and if he wants to have a retreat where people play naked Ouija board, I don't care. But he's being paid by the taxpayers. He should go and do his job, and he should really sit down and answer some of these questions about what he knew about gain-of-function research, how far back does his knowledge go, and who is he talking to in China, whether it's U.S. diplomats, researchers, Chinese doctors, people within the lab who are thanking him for his help in the gain-of-function research. And those are the more critical questions that I want to hear answered from him, and not necessarily the ones about which tie to wear in the spring.
Exactly. And Kaylee, we've spoken before that part of the reason why the gain-of-function research there was so troublesome is because United States scientists attached to the embassy raised many questions and concerns about the safety and management in dealing with that type of research. Surely Dr. Fauci knew about it, and yet we heard from him months and months and months ago, "Oh, I got you, no problem at all. Yes, it's quite clear where it came from," or at least that's the perception, right?
Right. And then he gives $600,000 of U.S. taxpayer dollars to the Wuhan lab. Wow, that's what Fauci was doing. But what else was Dr. Fauci doing when you had the commander-in-chief, the leader of the free world, stand in front of the country and say, hey, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that this might be coming from the lab, COVID might have leaked from the lab. Fauci comes out and undermines the president while he's emailing cozy emails to China about how we'll get through this together. He's undermining the president of the United States. And one last thing I want to point out is Cuomo and Fauci actually have a lot in common. I loved reading through Dr. Fauci's emails, and one of those emails, he sent a link to a friend or to someone, it's an unknown recipient, and he sent an article about both he and Cuomo, and the title of the article was Cuomo Crush and Fauci Fever, Sexualization of These Men on the Internet is Real, and he sent it in bewilderment. Wow.
Do you know what I call that? Thirst.
Yes.
Right?
Frightening.
I mean, that's so much thirst. Like, wow, look at what's going on here. They see me like him. I mean, he is parched.
Yes.
Well, I completely defer to you
goodness
ladies on that
gracious.
topic.
Thank you, John.
John, I don't want to cut you off. What did you say?
No, I say I completely defer to you ladies on that topic.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we know a thirst trap when we see one. So, I want to go back to this idea of what did Fauci know and when did he know it? And I'm going to come to you on this, Kaylee. So I have to think it has to be more than just basic knowledge. I think that when you're running for office or when you're at a high level and you're attached to someone already running for office, because, I mean, Biden's called him a friend. We don't know where their relationship goes back to either. Was Fauci in full knowledge of some of the things that would have been in intel documents? I think that's a fair question, because he's got friends who, on both sides of the political aisle, who might have shared something. He was the top epidemiologist trying to, run things during the worst epidemic we've seen since 1918. Did he know anything? And what would he maybe accidentally have known? And what would he have done with that information? Is it also in emails? And who is this Chinese official? We should know more about him.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think those are all very relevant questions. I mean, I think it's a fair point. Did he know about the intelligence? We know Mike Pompeo, head of the State Department, knew about the intelligence pointing to the lab. President Trump said it publicly. Dr. Fauci was in the Situation Room. I went to the Situation Room with him for some of those meetings of the coronavirus task force. It was never discussed when I was in there. Was it discussed when I wasn't in there? It's a good question.
Well, reminder that intel was not classified. It was categorized.
No, because it was in the public eventually.
Yeah, but from the U.S. scientists, it was categorized as sensitive, not classified, when they disseminated their concerns back to the United States. So it would almost be, an abdication of duty if he didn't know about it, right? If he wasn't
hard to get away
fully
from that
informed.
word.
Got to throw it in somewhere.